Welcome to our first ever WeTalk Miami. For our second episode, we're going to cover the union between art and philanthropy, which is a big one in terms of opening people's hearts and minds and wallets, which is vital and absolutely essential to the future of art, which is vital to the future of humankind. And these days it seems more vital than ever. But before I start the show, I want to just explain to those of you who are new to WeTalk that WeTalk is a show about the women who shape our culture across all aspects, the women who make society tick. I want to thank our sponsors, Working Not Working, Majority, and Interloper Films. Our founding sponsor, Dell, which has been an incredible partner to all creators out there and is really about helping creators realize their vision. And since we are in an age of technology, and technology is having such an impact on art, it's great that Dell puts their money where their mouth is and has supported this show since its inception. And then also we're at the Miami Beach Cinematheque right now, which is a gorgeous space. They also have come in and supported our cause as well. We want to thank Deep Eddy Vodka for helping to lubricate this event, along with The Palm by Whispering Angel and Pierce Media and Associates, and then also the local Miamians who have helped so much in booking our panelists because they know who in Miami matters. Adrian Bonhase, Liza Walton, Natasha Tauber, Rhonda Mitrani, Margaret Cardillo, and Malin Dominguez from the New York Film Academy, who supplied us with gear and awesome young talent to help us record this for all of you out there on the internet. Okay, now if you haven't tuned out during all of that, you get to meet our panelists. Art and philanthropy. For this panel, we've assembled three incredible dynamites who are working to make the world of arts more accessible through their projects and philanthropic efforts. And we're discussing the unique ways you have gone about doing this. So we have here Cathy Leff, the president of Leff Initiatives, and cultural placemaker Ximena. Caminos. That's, by the way, such a beautiful name.
Thank you.
And cultural advisor and social impact entrepreneur Karolina Garcia Jayaram.
That's good. I like
Jayaram.
I like Jayaram, yes.
No, Jayaram?
No, I mean, Jayaram really is the way to say it, but no one says it that way, so thank you.
I was raised in Miami, Florida.
Yeah, so you got it.
Where I learned to speak Espanol. So I'm going to start on the end. Cathy is the president of Leff Initiatives, which is a boutique consulting firm specializing in conceiving, developing, and executing cultural strategies in the context of community building with her clients. But also among your clients is a not-for-profit called Bakehouse Art Complex. And for those of you who don't know what Bakehouse is, it occupies a former industrial bakery in Wynwood and provides studios, community, and support and amenities to over 60 artists. And there you lead the board in reshaping the program and the future use of its 2.5-acre campus, which is really important. Before that, you were the director of the Wolfsonian Florida International University, overall, a museum and research center in Miami Beach dedicated to the study and appreciation of the persuasive power of art and design. Also, Cathy, was responsible for taking the then private collection of Mitchell Wolfson into the public domain, negotiating and overseeing its gifting to the state of Florida university system, which I imagine would mean revenue for the system, or is it more about putting the art all over those campuses?
No, it was really about facilitating a way for a private individual to gift an incredibly, I mean, more than the contents of that building, the contents of almost 3 buildings, to the university, which is part of the state university system. And in return, so it's really giving an asset to the state, which they have to approve, because then it obligates them to take care of it in perpetuity. And in this case, the gift, the university, in order to accept it, needed a commitment from those state legislature to ensure that it could support it in perpetuity. So it came with an allocation from the state legislature in exchange for the gifting of a collection that now is probably, and real estate assets that are probably close to more than $500 million today.
Wow. Well, and so much of art is about space. The space to show the art, the space to move within the art. And Ximena, we're gonna talk about what you're doing at Faina now, and how it's much more performance-based as opposed to necessarily static art. But Cathy, I mean, how are you deciding what to do with Bakehouse? Who gets to go in there, and who gets to work there, and what will you do with the rest of the campus?
So, I mean, Bakehouse is an extraordinary asset, and it's an incredible story, especially in the context of the success of the rapid urbanization in Miami and its success culturally and relative to real estate development. So Bakehouse is comprised of 60 working artist studios. Actually, there's more than 60 artists, because some of them are collectives, and so say there's between 60 and 70 artists in 60 studios, 30 affiliated artists, because there's spaces for metalwork, ceramics, woodwork, print, photography, etc. So basically it's an organization started by 3 artists in the 1980s, in the mid-1980s. I happened to be working for the city when the city gave them the money to acquire an abandoned bakery. So I facilitated the grant that enabled them to buy a land in a then blighted area, Wynwood. Who would know 35 years later that it would be really the center of like the most real estate, most valuable real estate, among the most valuable real estate today. And then they acquired the site because they want to ensure that artists would not be displaced due to gentrification. Their building was taken away in the Grove, torn down. And 35 years later, it's really the only artist-owned, not artist-owned, but artist-serving or artist studio space dedicated to serving and building the careers of artists in the urban core. So who knew 35 years ago that today, I mean, it would be even more unaffordable to artists to both live and work in the city of Miami. So it's becoming a problem. And so we sit on it's a 35,000 square foot Art Deco era industrial bakery sitting on a 2.5 acre campus. The building occupies about 25%. So working with the organization, the artists within, the community and the board, to try to understand how we can use the real estate assets to do some sort of smart development that really adds more value to artists and creative people, while at the same time ensuring the perpetuity of affordable spaces for artists.
Yeah, wow. I have more questions for you, but just so everybody knows who's up here. Karolina Garcia Jayaram has led national institutions and initiatives dedicated to supporting the country's most established artists and also up-and-coming artists. Most recently served as the CEO and president of the National Young Arts Foundation, which has that extraordinary building in downtown LA, I mean Miami. I'm so used to saying, what was that? Somebody's blowing a whistle here at WeTalk. Anyway, I had a screening of Brand: A Second Coming actually at the National Young Arts Foundation headquarters. Those walls have the light comes through them, and also it projects in 360. So my movie Brand about Russell Brand was like playing all around the walls. It was so cool. And I've recently worked with you as well, speaking at UCLA to some of the kids that you organized there. And then also previously, Karolina served as president and CEO of United States Artists, and while there helped relocate USA from LA to Chicago, spearheading a $20 million operating endowment campaign, and also discovering a really vibrant community in Chicago, which you can't say enough about. From my research, I've noticed that. Prior to joining USA, she served as the executive director of the Chicago Artists Coalition, where she reestablished the 40-year-old organization into a vital resource for Chicago's multidisciplinary professional artist community. And while in Chicago, also served as Mayor Rahm Emanuel's Cultural Advisory Council and was named Chicagoan of the Year in the Arts by the Chicago Tribune. Cool. So you've done nothing. She's done nothing. I don't even know what you're doing here. No. So you mentioned sort of the growing exclusivity in arts education. And one of your main goals is to break that down, to make it more accessible, the shrinking public funding for art in public schools, and the higher and higher rising college tuitions. Can you tell us what you do, what can be done, or what you think about all of that with regards to these foundations that you've been part of?
It's not so much really going to be the work that I'm involved in now. I am changing gears significantly now that I've left Young Arts, but it was the work that I was doing for a long time, and that I hope and pray that Young Arts continues to do, because as organizations that are identifying and supporting the next generation of artists and creating, a world for them where they can hopefully make a living, the pipeline cannot exist only for kids who have access to the arts. And more that's becoming such a huge divide, and so if you're getting into programs like Tanglewood or Young Arts or programs like this that are usually only available to young people who have access to teachers and materials and equipment and whatever to get into these kinds of programs. And we saw this increasingly as a problem at Young Arts, that we were not really exposing the program to a wide enough array of young people in this country. And it's a huge amount of work. It's very important work. It's very difficult to drill down into the reasons why you don't get certain kids from certain cultures or certain neighborhoods or certain age groups or what have it. But we have to do that work. And so the foundations have gotten a lot smarter about working in this way, but it's about more data that we need to understand what are the barriers and understand those barriers. And it's a lot of psychological issues that kids have in terms of not applying to programs like this. They don't feel the confidence that they need, or they don't have the exposure, like I said, that they need. It's so complicated of why we don't see more of it. But if the art programs rather, in the public schools are being cut every single day, you're going to get fewer artists, right, that are getting out there, because it is all about that exposure. And many times what we saw at Young Arts, because it was multidisciplinary, is that if you had a young person come in dance, because that's what they had access to, then for the first time they see an architect, or for the first time they see a playwright, they might completely change course, because it's really just a very young, creative, open mind that you're encountering. And by giving them access to all this other information, and master teachers like you who've been a master teacher for us, so much is possible. So it's it's incredibly important work to be able to show these kids the full universe of possibility in terms of creative fields. And I think many times we romanticize, or not those of us who've worked with artists, but many people do romanticize what it is to be in the arts, and they don't know the many, many jobs that are available other than just the person singing on the stage. There's a lot of work behind that goes into that. And so understanding the careers that are available within the creative sectors, I think we need to do a lot better job of exposing young people to.
That's a great
Really important.
point.
Yeah, not everybody,
Not everybody's going to be
I would
the
have
singer.
loved to have been an artist. I studied poetry, I wrote a lot as a young person, but that wasn't truly my calling, and instead my calling was to help and support artists. But I think that I had a lot of help along the way. I had a lot of mentors, I had a lot of privilege that allowed for a lot of these doors to open to me that I know haven't opened for many other people. So I don't know if that answers your question, but
That's a great answer.
the work is
we
it's
should
very
talk more about
complicated.
STEM and STEAM.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm the mother of a now 15-year-old, recently turned 15, and he's 6'3", so it's shocking. But
Wow.
when he was in elementary school, I had to volunteer as the art teacher, because literally he was at a public school and there was not, and I was just horrified that he wouldn't know he and his, who Georgia O'Keeffe was, or Van Gogh, or that they wouldn't have a chance to hold a paintbrush in their hands. And I by no means I'm not a master teacher of painting. Film, fine. But it's sad when the parents have to step up, and if there's not a parent to step up, then there's no art exposure whatsoever.
But oftentimes what I found, my first job ever that I worked in this kind of area was with PEN, a writers organization in New York, and we took books into some of the poorest and least resourced schools in the country. Didn't have libraries. Some of these schools didn't even have drinking water. And they were certainly the first books these kids had ever owned. And to see their kind of transformation in terms of that their story was enough to get them out of the situation that they were in was incredible, because I think a lot of time the curriculums don't speak to the experience these young people have. How can you teach Shakespeare to a kid who, you have to start with where they are in life, and authors who can speak to their experience, you know what I mean? So going into those schools as a working artist, it's a lot more impactful many times.
Yep.
Yeah.
Ximena, Caminos, is the founder of the cultural platform Honey Lab, chair of Blue Lab Preservation Society, a lot of labs, and part of the Harvard GSD think tank for the future of American cities. Ximena is one of the most unconventional creatives of her generation, is known for a keen post-disciplinary approach that bridges culture, community building, urban development, and place making, and has been recently appointed artistic visionary planner for the Underline, the largest public art program in the United States, or project in the United States, which we're looking at here. I have memories of that sort of as a child in Miami. The Metro Rail, we called it. Now it's called the Underline, I guess.
The Underline runs below the Metro Rail.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
It's like the High Line in New York is the top of
The High
what
Line,
was.
yeah.
This is below.
Above the Standard.
Yeah.
Caminos is the former artistic director and chair of Faina Art and CCO of the multi-award-winning Faina Group. In addition, she's a member of the New Museum Leadership Council, a founding member of the Solomon Guggenheim Museum's Latin American Circle Partner, and the Advisory Committee of Art Basel Cities. So this is a wild week for you. We are so honored to have you here. Thank you so much for joining us. We have a clip. Can you set it up, tied by the side?
Yeah.
Tied by side? Tell us about it before we play it.
So
we're looking.
Side by Side was an artistic processional performance that we designed. It took 2 years on the making to open the Faena Forum. So I don't know if all of you are familiar with Faena, but Faena here is what we call a large-scale cultural district that combines high art, high architecture, design, and in order to create a proper art space, I founded a 501c3 that's called Faena Arts, and we wanted to gift the forum to the community, and I thought that the most beautiful way of doing that was by creating something that would invite everybody to participate. So we commissioned 5 really interesting international artists and local artists, but then we invited over 30 local Miami institutions, Miami and Miami Beach. So we try to connect both cities because sometimes they're a little bit divided. And during 2 years, we worked on creating this civic ritual and the civic celebration. So what you are going to see is the result of 2 years of work, curated by an amazing woman, Claire Tancon, and there were works by Anthony Miralda, Carlos Betancourt, who else? I'm blanked. After Basel, like my brain is half dead. Well, we'll see it.
1, 2, 3 y...
Amazing.
So it was very beautiful because I was with Sarah Addison, the chair of Young Arts, watching the procession, and Sarah told me, I can't believe it took a foreigner to come to get everybody to work together, because my grandmother has been working towards that for so long. So it was the most flattering comment I received on this, because the truth is, when we arrived and started making faena, all the neighbors were so worried because a lot of them were Orthodox families, and when we were there building the hotel, the women were swimming in black in the ocean, you know, and I wonder, like, these women, they were very concerned because we were like a flying saucer landing there. And yeah, so very slowly we started building community, inviting them and sharing with them our plans. That took a long time on the making. So that I didn't want to make the procession on a Saturday because I thought it's Shabbat and it's not respectful. But the city wouldn't give us Collins Avenue otherwise. So we invited Zach the baker to make a giant challah bread. So yeah, that kind of like a Dali, you know, people walk with a challah bread. So it was very beautiful too. When the procession finished, many of these women came up to me to thank us, you know. But it took us like 5 years to turn around their mindsets. Because they just were afraid they would lose their neighborhood. Now they see, and this is what we call cultural placemaking, what culture and what high art and incredible architecture and design can do to a neighborhood, that it's not gentrifying it if you build a really strong program that's accessible for everybody. You truly bring value.
It seems like you're trying to draw out all of the mix of cultures actually into the space. So tell us about that. Tell us about the time-based performance that you've brought and what that means, the cross-disciplinary work that you're bringing into the neighborhood.
So my interest in art at that time, me like Karolina, I also shift focus, and I think it's very important to change throughout life. But when I,
Yes, we all support changing
Exactly.
and transforming and growing.
Exactly, so evolution. So when I founded Fine Art, I wanted the project to be site-specific to Miami, because I understand that the only way to make something successful is to be adopted first by your neighbors and your community, and then you can expand internationally, because I did want to make an international comment on art. So I created something that was very experimental, immersive, time-based, wrote a manifesto that I gave to artists where I asked them to challenge the notion of time, which is very difficult. And then they can do with that whatever they want, But I basically gave them 4 or 5 guidelines during the years I run the institution, and then always in the focus in the place where where disciplines meet. So I call it cross-disciplinary, but it's also, we are in a post-disciplinary era as well. Some disciplines are very specific, some are very unspecific right now. So you don't know if it's art, if it's design, if it's photo, if it's cinema, and words are a limit. So what I wanted to do was art that would work within and blur those boundaries. So for the opening, so the artistic processional performance was on the streets. But for inside the forum, I wanted to treat the forum as a time machine. And I commissioned the architects that designed it, that it's the Pritzker Prize winner, Rem Koolhaas, genius, a cultural analyst, and his team, Shohei Shigematsu. I thought that the best way to present this space was to make the best way to unveil architecture is through movement. So I thought we were going to make an architectural striptease, and we were going to make a very sexy unveiling of the building. So I commissioned Pam Tanowitz, an amazing choreographer, and I asked the architects to be the scenographers, to design the stage. So I met at Faena for lunch with Shohei, Japanese that leads the OMA office, and I had given him the manifesto that he had to challenge time. So, yeah. And he blew my mind. I don't know, we don't have that video, it would be amazing, but he basically, the forum has 320 non-identical openings, windows. So what they did is, as a whole day, they mapped the lights and shadows that these openings cast inside the space during the day, during daylight. Let's say we had, 14 hours of daylight.
So over the passage of a day,
Yeah, so
all the shadows as it went.
Exactly.
On the outside of the building?
And then, exactly. And then they made an inverted stage. So the stage was elevated, but the people were inside with cutouts of these shadows. So during the performance, you could actually feel like you were moving into the future. It was very stunning. Yeah, stunning. One of the best works I've done. Rem congratulated me. He never speaks. He never says a word. He's very dry. He was like, "Did you do this?" Yes. He was.
He appreciated the challenge.
Yes.
We need to challenge each other. That's
Yes.
for sure.
Yes.
And I wonder, listening to all three of you, and understanding that your missions are aligned.
Yeah.
All
We're
three
just
of you.
commenting we're going to do something together.
Yes, this-
Thanks to you.
Yay! That's so great. So what are you going to do? Let's talk about it.
Exactly. So what I did is I love what I was doing at Faena. I feel I wanted to give a step aside. I left it with my team. It's still a super strong and powerful institution, Fine Art. They did an amazing job now for Art Basel with the Faena Festival. But I wanted to be more specific in using art as a tool for change, and the commitment with the underline is very big as well. So it's like a 7-year art master plan. I presented it to Knight Foundation. It's a $12 million master plan. Last Monday, they gave us a matching fund grant. Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah. And I think it's so important to use art right now. There's such a cultural crisis, and us, like the panel before, we were speaking about Homo sapiens and where are we moving forward to. And the truth is, like, it's unbelievable how, as a species, we're probably the only species that destroys its habitat. So I'm more interested because my gift has always been to be able to use art in a good way, because that's how I was raised and how I was trained and what I studied. So it's more, I like speaking about the notion of urban acupuncture, treating the city as a body and like sticking a cultural needle in points that need to be injected with a cultural virus that at some point will deliver a message, and get everybody with a cultural flu. And yes, and using art as a tool for change. So that's what I'm doing now. I'm working also with major artists, more known, less known, emerging, national and international, in creating platforms that raise awareness about certain topics and pressing topics. So I connected this, which is Honey Lab, with Harvard, because I work in this project that's called The Future of American Cities, where they, and Cathy too, because what they're doing is they chose Miami as a city that combines the three largest problems that American cities have, which is public housing, public transport, and sea level rise. So my focus with Blue Lab, which is like the sister hive of Honey Lab, it is a 501c3 that I chair, and it's an ocean preservation society, which unbelievably is the first one in Miami Beach. I didn't know. When I filed it.
And how long ago did you file it?
A month ago, just now.
You haven't had an ocean preservation society in
There's
Miami
something
Beach?
for the pelicans, but there's no. Yes.
Just the pelicans are okay.
No, I swear.
No manatees?
It's incredible. I met with Elizabeth Wheaton. She's an amazing woman, a girl. She's super young. She created the preservation sector in the city. Like, she's the director of preservation 10 years ago, and there's only 10 people working for her. So I met with her and I told her my plans, and she said it would actually help me a lot, because she, as the city, she can't fundraise privately. So when these type of organizations are created, you become a branch for them to be able to raise public funding, which they cannot do. So I asked her we're working on creating an agenda together and starting to address those issues, but using art as a tool. Because that's a tool I know how to use. I mean, other people sing, like you're saying.
So is the Underline project part of the Future of American Cities project?
No, they're not directly connected, but we are going to connect them.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that the beauty of the Underline is this genius. Her name is Meg Daly. Meg had a bike accident. Riding her bike, she fell in a perfect plank, broke both of her arms, and she had this idea of going to the mayor and saying, why don't we make this space, which is really, destroyed, something beautiful, like the Highland in New York. So that's how she started, like knocking everybody's doors, very stubborn. And she finally got, I think, like around $120 million from public funds to be able to commit to the development of this 10-mile linear park, which is actually the largest art project in America. So my vision for it, when she called me, because I worked a lot with art, public art, and urbanism, is to, and having worked with so many architects, the city is like a body, and this type of abandoned spaces or no spaces become like scars in the urban tissue. And these scars are a disconnect between communities, between a lot of things that are very disruptive. So the possibility of using art as a restorative force to reconnect that tissue, and instead transforming that scar into, I like the metaphor of a river, like that's where the place all communities came to bathe, to barter, or to enjoy. So to turn that scar into a river where the flow, is a cultural flow. And not just culture at large, but also inviting other practitioners. Like when I went to the Knight Foundation the other day, we were like 50 people that received. They donated $37 million in 1 hour, and they donated that because they made a study. They've donated $128 million in the last 10 years, and they've seen the fruits of how many new cultural institutions have appeared in Miami, how the cultural level raised, how many job posts, towards your point, new jobs regarding the creative industries.
What was the return?
I don't know, but it's enormous.
Enough. That
Yes,
they were
that
like,
they decided to put
a
another
lot.
extra 37.
Let me just open it up a little bit.
Yeah.
So how can you two collaborate on the underline and on the overall project of Blue Lab and Honey Lab with regards, I mean, the sea level rise situation, and just as someone who, I made a film about climate change, I'm from Miami, and you know, the subject of my film constantly went on about Miami, and this is 2010 that I made this film, and it was already a serious problem. I mean, seawalls, and you have water rising up in your streets regularly, and in your garages and basements. Well, there are no basements here, right?
And it's not just that, it's the pollution.
Yeah.
It's not just the level rising, it's the amount of like bacteria, It's the Lake Okeechobee is the problem.
So, I mean, I'm optimistic, though Miami is the epicenter of everything that will face every mass urbanized place in the world. You know, we're at the center of, you know, this, I mean, not just, and we're not the only city experiencing it. I mean, one could look all over the country and see what's going on relative to climate change. But the good thing that I think about Miami and why I'm so optimistic is it's a city that always has been resilient. I mean, it's always adapted to change, whether it was displacements of populations or of real estate booms and busts or whatever it's been. So Miami already has so much experience since its founding 100 years ago to constantly adapting to some sort of change. So I think that we have it in our DNA to be resilient and adaptive, and I think we'll solve some of the problems. And I mean, it will look like a different city. No, I don't mean to diminish the threat of climate change, but I think the city will adapt and design its way into a future. Relative to Ximena and the work of Karolina, I've admired both of their work. I mean, they're just such exquisite women. I've always really, most of my entire career, which is longer than theirs because I'm older, has really been looking at this intersection of culture and community building and placemaking, and recognizing, especially in Miami, where we have such an incredible diversity. And every positive story on Miami has come out of the cultural creation and the creative community. Not every story, but a big part of Miami's image making in the past 25 years has been a result of culture and art. It's also a place where people come together. It's so incredible to see, even just over the past couple of days, I've bumped into so many incredible spaces here that I never knew about. Smoke signals. I mean, a group of artists of color, both poetry and music and art making and social. So I think one is artists. A lot of the practice now going on in Miami is really aligned to this idea of culture and community change, and in a very positive way. I mean, I met some young man yesterday. I mean, his name is Dan B., and he has an organization, I can't remember exactly what it stands for, but it's all about not complaining about the problems in the city, but how do you use art and culture to affect positive change. Artists have always been shaped and reflected their time. So yes. I believe they're the best propagandists and they have the best tools, I mean, forever, since the beginning of expression, to really influence how we read, see, and shape the world. So I think it's now just really people coming together, Ximena's idea and Karolina's idea. One is the idea of education connecting to people who don't have access, the access and inaccessible, but I think generally speaking, the broader community, and certainly the 60 artists at Bakehouse, I would say they're incredibly community interested and social, have a social practice, engaged in the community, want to draw in the resources, pull the resources from Bakehouse and give back to the community. So I think there is this whole thing, and it's sort of this confluence of ideas and people and personalities and time and issues, and I think people really want to be part of a positive future as opposed to complaining about the problems of the past. And I love Ximena's thinking, and I think that because we're all aligned and we all live here, we've invested in this community either yesterday or 3 days ago and tomorrow, but I think that it's a city that has always welcomed people and welcomed good ideas and embraced them. So I'm very positive that there'll be many opportunities.
As somebody who's, was raised here until I was 17 and left, and I live in Los Angeles, but when I come back, I mean, and I've only been back recently, the growth You know, it's enormous. I mean, it's more than I've witnessed in any city in America, for sure. Maybe the world, and I've been around. So, yeah. I mean, just the color, the vibrancy, the spirit, and the mix of cultures, you know? I mean, there's a reason why Art Basel is based here, but I think it's also really something that each one of you has individually said to me, that it's like when the fair closes down and leaves, it's extremely important that the community support each other. And there's artists being displaced from their homes here in the city. And the economy is really not going well for artists, but so philanthropy is needed to keep artists going, but at the same time, art is vital to keep all of us giving back and being conscious and being aware. So it's kind of this interplay, this cycle that needs to happen. I put it to you, you know, how do we best support the artistic community here? And also, you know, how can we shine a light on the artistic community so that people can make the changes that need to be made for Miami?
I think,
Who wants to start?
Carolina should start because
Carol,
she's rested her voice the most.
okay.
And she's the one that knows the most, I think, about it.
Okay, yes, teach us, Carolina.
No, I think, you know, what's interesting, I'm in a place right now of learning actually and changing quite significantly because I've been associated to very established and large national organizations for a long time. I think, you know, like many things of this generation and at this time in history, it's in need of disruption. I think the philanthropy model is in major need of disruption, and the nonprofit model in general is in need of that. And it's largely because I think it's outdated and that a lot of not young, I don't think it's an age thing at all. I think a lot of people today don't feel that the mechanisms available to us through philanthropy, and philanthropy being larger than just writing a check. I think it's support. You know, how do we support the community and build the city that we want to build? Let's talk about that as philanthropy. Well, do I join a board? Do I join a committee for a gala? Do I, you know, like it's these ways, these mechanisms that I think were largely invented by generations past. You know, people that some are not even around anymore, largely by women. So if you're talking about institutions, museums, symphonies, operas, they were really founded by women. You know, women who were not encouraged to work, but were very smart women married to men who encouraged them to be social in that way, but were very smart and industrious and founded all of these cultural institutions and created these methods by which they could create, you know, these institutions. And then they were largely then directed by men for a very long time. And I don't find that system, personally, and from what I hear from many people in philanthropy who want to support the arts in particular, they don't find it satisfying or fulfilling or impactful. And I think that it's a moment where we do ourselves a disservice by staying within that system and not kind of disrupting it, and also saying you have to be a part of the art world to be a philanthropist within the art world. And I think there's this interconnectivity of the city now where many of us want to be involved in environment or in the sciences or in women's causes or in children's causes or whatever it is, and that there needs to be more of a holistic approach in terms of philanthropy. And just take it outside of just the larger institutions, because there are so many small organizations that really are the bedrock of our city and that are fighting tooth and nail to exist, and oftentimes go away as soon as the founder loses, you know, the energy or the ability to be able to run an organization on fumes all the time. So I don't know, for me, it's getting people together who are from much more diverse backgrounds to solve the problems that we have now, whether it's sea level rise or early childhood education or access to arts education, and opening it up and allowing philanthropy to get its hands dirtier, you know, than it has before. That it's not and it's not taking away from the transactional thrill that people feel by going to luncheons or going to galas. There's always going to be people who want to do that, and they do support these institutions. They bring in a lot of money, and they're not going away anytime soon. But I think we do need to challenge that model.
More like pop-ups or something, right?
Well, just challenge how we allow people who are give them more say in what's happening.
We only have a few minutes because Ximena needs to catch a flight. So since we are a bunch of women here and women founded all this stuff, and women, we are naturally collaborators, which is why we talk, women everywhere talk. We do know how to talk.
We want to talk.
We've proven it to all of you that we know how to talk. But yeah, what do we do? What do we do?
Well, I think there's a lot of power now. I mean, there's actually somebody sitting in the audience today named Deborah Hoffman, who is the founder of an incredible organization. And I think, there is a power of an individual. It's now called Funding Arts Network. It was started as 50 over 50. And it was basically, she called together 50 friends over 50 years old to donate an amount of money.
Directly.
Absolutely, direct giving. And it's now a model nationally. The individual now can do so much. We talked earlier, the earlier panel about, social media and about promoting and stuff. So I think you're right about the older institution, but at the same time, there's this whole new way and disruption that's happening with technology. I mean, I'm sure I don't know if you've done any of your films through GoFundMe or other platforms.
I started a network for entrepreneurs and innovators called A Total Disruption.
Yes.
About in 2012, before that was like a word that people use that much. To me, it was an overused word. And I did do a Kickstarter, and I felt like I was jumping off a 80th floor of a building.
Or whatever, right.
I was like, what have I done?
But
I think my
artists
son said, you have to make $3,500 a day or you lose it all. Mom, you had a great career. What were you thinking? And I was like, what was I thinking? And then all of a sudden across the world, some Sikh or prince or something gave me $2,000, like my phone rang, like in the middle of the night as I was going to bed, so depressed. Wow. $2,000, like, oh, so if you do put an idea out there that has some value, and you do say, hey, let's do this together, and let's make something that didn't exist before that we all need, and let's get smarter, faster together, people want to be part of that.
And beyond the obvious, people who are always being asked.
I felt like, I'm putting out my hand to my fans. I felt embarrassed. But it wasn't that. I was building a community. And that's, I think, we have to kind of change the way we think about that.
And think about that it's not going to be the same old people asking the same old people about it. And, and so I think it is, Miami is a really good example of where something's starting to really accelerating in culture. I think Miami-Dade County government had early on recognized the value of culture high and low, art high and low, and has really seeded a lot. NIDA Foundation's come along with a huge investment. Now we see public policy, the city of Miami with its visionary planning department doing all kinds of things to incentivize developers, getting bonuses for density and or reduction of parking and other things in order to provide affordable spaces for artists. So it's going to be a lot of things in different ways than we thought of philanthropy in a different way. So it's the individual, it's what public policy can do, it's like federal tax, income tax breaks,
the opportunity
it's
zones.
Everything, opportunity zone. It's going to be so many different ways, and I think it's really looking at philanthropy through the lens of, really how entrepreneurs look at raising capital or, raising a capital fund. So I think, really artists are getting smarter. Cultural producers are getting smarter. I mean, I still totally agree with everything that you said, but I think it's also, while disrupting the past, but also being, at least there is philanthropy in this country, but it will be done differently in the future, and it is already being done differently.
Just evolving.
And also something like the Underline, just as such an opportunity to expose artists maybe from Bakehouse in the Underline, and then it's in people's faces, and then they're like, oh, well, we should be contributing to that, or...
Well, oftentimes artists are just brought in historically as like the end, put a sculpture here after this is all done. And really now I think you see more artists being brought in the planning stages.
That's interesting.
And given a true seat at the table. That's been work that people like us have been doing for 20 years to put them at the table. I mean, when I was at the mayor's in Chicago's advisory thing, when I was sitting at the first meeting, I said, where are we're building a cultural plan, the first cultural plan for the city of Chicago in 25 years. I said, where are the artists? I said, well, you're representing the artists. What? I'm not an artist, I'm a lawyer. Like, I'm not an artist, And I was like, you have to invite, how are we going to build a cultural plan for the city without artists here? So those kinds of things I've seen change in the past 10 years. It's been really refreshing to see that.
And I also think...
Ximena, close us down.
Okay, so last year, in this country, $410 billion were donated to nonprofit causes. So that's major. That's a lot.
410 billion.
Billion.
On nonprofits.
On nonprofits. So you can see there is a culture of donating and people support causes. Which
about
is
half the country cares a lot.
Just kidding. Exactly. But then I think something we're not mentioning that it's interesting, and that's because in Argentina this culture doesn't exist, so I had to develop to be smart and get companies to support what I did, private companies. So the procession you just saw, incredibly, like those purple Mercedes-Benz with corns on top, that I never thought Mercedes would ever agree to do that with their cars. Mercedes gave me $1.5 million. So it's not just public
What did they have
and
on top?
taxes.
Horns.
Corns and like pineapples, because we turned them into like food trucks, and they were like their best cars. I had to convince them, you know. But I think that also, if you're smart, you can marry the interests of companies with the interest of really good artists. They have to be very finely curated, because of course there's a fine line there where you don't want the company to use the artist just as a marketing tool. But if you do it properly, there are very serious companies out there. There's a content crisis in the world, and they realize, like, you don't see models in ads anymore. You see celebrities, right? They're all actors and actresses. Well, it's the same thing with artists. Artists are a very hot commodity, and you have to, well leveraged, they can really get a lot of resources from very interesting companies. So I work a lot with, I don't know if we can say names of companies here.
I think it's a free
Okay,
for all.
so like since my career, I worked a lot with Mercedes-Benz forever. They always supported everything I've done. American Express, Centurion, Samsung, Moet Chandon, Moet Hennessy, like really good brands, like luxury brands. They understand the value of art. And even many of them, like LVMH, have their own like amazing cultural center in Paris. So they are philanthropists as well. And part of all the Faena Festival is supported by Pierre Jouet. I think they put like 800,000. So what Cathy was saying, in Miami, I don't know if in Miami Beach that law exists, every 10,000 square feet built, they need to donate 1% of that cost to public art, which is amazing. That's like a tax. They can decide where, but then the Miami City Planning Council decides what. And they don't choose. So they say, okay, I want it in my backyard, you know, like the Brickell City Center, whatever, they have to donate a lot. So the girls, like Amanda Sanfilippo, the curators that are there, are the curators with the largest budget in the country, because there's such a smart law. That law, maybe we can push it here.
A great law.
There's one in Miami Beach.
There's one in Miami
exists,
Beach.
yeah.
So every
That's
10,000.
what Brandy.
Well, it's
Percent for our
yeah,
bill.
yeah. Every city and the municipality has it. Dade County government has an overall, but it
This is
requires
why
each
Miami's so
municipality.
beautiful.
But Miami, the city of Miami, is quite visionary about how they're allowing to do it, in recognition of the displacement of artists and artist spaces and artist-serving organizations, and allowing you to, you know, if you don't want to put it into public art per se, you're putting it into spaces that allow art making to occur. So I think there's also other visionary ways that governments, and I'm so excited that the city of Miami has incredible leadership in the planning department and the planners in their thinking. And I think it could be a model for, I mean, New York obviously has had always great public policy around art and culture.
I don't know that
But
Los
it's
Angeles
nice.
has it, but we need to bring it there. I know that you need to make an airplane, so we're gonna have to call this one, but I wanna say our next panel is Art for Social Change Through Women's Empowerment. And we have incredible people. Barbara Hulanicki, who's basically a legend, is here. Iconic fashion designer, also designer of Art Deco. Art curator, art broker, and lawyer Carla Ferguson is here despite being a little bit sick. And she's also a legend and has been up against a horrible hate crime this weekend at her gallery. So we're gonna talk about that coming up. And filmmaker Rhonda Mitrani, who made a really, really innovative short film that we'll share some with you, is coming up. So please take a moment, grab a bagel. I want to thank all of you for being here.
Thank you.
Yeah, Cathy, Karolina, and Ximena, such an inspiration. Thank you so much. Yeah.